you done now? Oh, Brad, what have you done now?
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Brad Gilmore Show on demand. We have a great show for you today. Joining us on the program, his name is Peter Mehlman. Peter Mehlman was the executive producer, co-executive producer of the most watched, the most famous, the most popular television show of all time. He was also one of the head writers throughout several of the key seasons of Seinfeld. Yes, Peter Mehlman joins us to talk his career, obviously how he got the job, working for Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld, two of the greatest comedic minds of all time. He also talks to us a little bit about basketball. We recorded this previous to the NBA Finals, so we talk a little bit about LeBron and MJ, talk about James Harden, and then we talk about his time with Howard Cosell. Yeah, Peter Mehlman talked to Howard Cosell, and he shares an interesting story about how he got a job at the Washington Post because he's a woman. Awesome stuff with Peter Mehlman. Hey, I want to thank my guest last week, Rex Andrews, for sharing his story. Real emotional interview toward the latter part there when he starts talking about his dad. Really big props to Rex for being open and honest and candid with me on the show. Really appreciate that. And I also want to give a shout out to Stevie Ray, Angel Corona, and Abel Andrew Jackson. We hopped on the line and we talked about the big fight, Mayweather-McGregor, which we'll be talking about more here on this show. So stay tuned, working on a lot of things. Thank you for those who checked out the SE Scoops Wrestling Podcast, which I host, and Back to the Future, the podcast, Season 4, coming soon. Okay, last thing I want to say before I get to the Peter Mehlman interview is I want to give a special shout-out to Jason, the Solomonster Solomon. He celebrated his 500th episode of his podcast, Solomonster Sounds Off. I appreciate him for giving me a shout out there at the beginning of the show. I'm returning the favor, and I want to get. I thought about calling into his show because I had something I want to talk to him about. I'm going to actually put in the word for him today to see if I can get him on this show coming in the coming weeks. I have something I have to talk about with him. So I'm going to reach out to the Solid Monster, those of you who are fans of him. So now, without further ado, let me get to my interview with the one and only, the incredible, the super talented and funny, Peter Mehlman. Peter Mehlman joins me right now. Peter, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I got nothing to do, and I'm sitting here talking to Houston. What could be bad?
There you go. I like it. Well, thank you for coming on the show. Hey, it's exciting to have you here. I mean, I've been a fan of yours for quite some time. I actually, believe it or not, it took me a while to put draw a line in connection to you and Seinfeld because I actually came onto you from your sports show.
Oh God, yeah, that was fun.
That was such a great show. Peter Mehlman's Wide World of Sports. Is that right?
Narrow World of Sports.
Narrow World of Sports. I'm sorry. Narrow World of Sports. That was such a great show. Did you like doing that?
I have to say that was probably the most fun I've ever had working.
Really?
It was just so much fun, and it was easy, and, we had this tight little crew. And, once I got Kobe Bryant to do it, I could pretty much get anybody. People were, excited to do it. So, it was really fun.
No hopes of maybe returning to that show someday?
Actually, I'm supposed to be talking to somebody about that pretty soon.
Okay, I like the tease. I think right now would be a great time for it because sports overall is so great right now. But basketball to me has become a year-round sport, and I know you're a big basketball guy like I am, and I think it's become the most. I don't know, the sport with the most stories going on at it at one time. What'd you think of the NBA season so far this year?
I know the playoffs hasn't been great as far as drama or anything like that, but I think every NBA season is pretty great. And the only the only real bummer about this season is some of the big injuries that happened. I hated to see like Zach LaVine go down, or the kid on Milwaukee who I love. But otherwise it was a great season. To me, they're like all great seasons. I just love the NBA.
Oh, it's the best. What did you think? I got to get Peter Mehlman's opinion on it. I'm a Houstonian. Obviously, I'm a Rockets fan till the day I die. What did you think of the Rockets' performance this year, and then in the playoffs?
I thought they had an incredible season, and I'm like a huge Harden fan. I actually think he's like the most talented offensive player in the league, and I thought they were amazing. Like D'Antoni did a great job. They have a really good chemistry now. I just love some of the people they've gotten. Like I love Trevor Ariza on any team. When he was with the Lakers, he was just that kind of guy who, doesn't stand out, but he loves playing defense. He hates when anybody scores off him. I love having a guy on the team like that. And, they're just a really cool squad. I thought they'd do better in the playoffs. I was a little bit surprised. I have to say, I was almost amazed that they didn't do better. I thought they were going to give San Antonio a real run.
Oh, I did too. I wanted to see, from the beginning of the season, like everyone was pretty sure that we're going to see the Cavaliers versus the Warriors. But I thought that my Houston Rockets were the one team that could shoot with the Warriors in the Western Conference Finals, and we might see an upset. That was what I had my heart set on, and then, they let me down. James Harden, as great as he is, he let me down in the Game 6 against the Spurs. It was hard to watch.
Yeah. Well, I feel for you.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Well, Peter, you've had actually real quick, who's your pick to win the finals?
I'll tell you, I'm not as I'm hoping for Golden State. Just I don't even know why, but I think people are kind of underestimating Cleveland. I'm shocked that Cleveland is such an underdog in the series.
I know they're I think Vegas has them 2-1, and they have the best player in the league, in the world.
They have the best player in the league. They might ultimately have the second best player in the league. I mean, people don't talk about Kyrie Irving as much as they should. This guy is really special. And not only his skills, which are off the charts, but he's so calm. He's such an adult out there. He's telling 10-year veterans to just be cool, relax, everything's going to be fine. And he's the guy who's going to hit that big shot for them. If I have if they're down by one, with 5 seconds to go, he's getting the ball for me, not LeBron.
Oh, 9 times out of 10. I think I would take Kyrie Irving over Steph Curry almost any day of the week. I think he can shoot. He can handle the ball better. I find him better at the one position, and I think he's got a great shot.
I don't think you could go wrong either way.
Well, yeah, no, of course, yeah. But I like Kyrie. I really do like Kyrie a lot, and I agree with you, and I'd give him the ball. I mean, he proved it last year in Game 7 of the Finals. He hit that big three, and that really solidified Cleveland's win last year. So I agree with you wholeheartedly on Kyrie Irving. So what do you think, real quick, one more thing on sports. Do you think LeBron James this season passed Michael Jordan of all-time playoff points scored? Where do you sit? Do you think LeBron is going to pass Michael as the greatest of all time? And I guess the better question would be, do you think Michael Jordan's the greatest of all time?
I do think Michael is the greatest of all time. I just do. As far as pure basketball, I don't love Michael as a guy. But, there's no denying how great he was. And, LeBron, but LeBron is he's just ridiculous. I mean, his size, everything. It's just, I think the only thing that'll keep LeBron from being seen as better than Michael is that his game is not as beautiful as Michael's. Aesthetically, his shot isn't beautiful like Kobe or Michael. He's just but nuts and bolts, he's a better passer than both of those guys, and obviously a better rebounder. And if he gets a defensive rebound, it's basically a basket or a foul at the other end, no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
But Michael's legend is going to be tough to match, and it's also that time. He kind of, he was so gigantic and still is, commercially and everything like that his legend just gets bigger and bigger.
No, I mean, I think you're right about that. I think chasing the ghost of Michael Jordan is going to be the biggest challenge for LeBron James. You obviously are a fan of basketball. You love sports. You have the sports show. I found out, doing a little bit of research with you. I mean, obviously I'm on sports radio. I do broadcasting for sports and professional wrestling. For me, I found out that you got to work with the greatest of all time, Howard Cosell. Is that right?
Yes. 2.5 years on ABC Sports Beat, which was kind of a sports journalism show, not unlike the show that Brian Gumbel has now, or, one of those E60 kind of shows. It was like the first real hardcore sports journalism show. It ran from 1981, I think, through 85. I was there from 82 through 84. And, it was like being in the center of the sports universe. I mean, there wasn't one person in the world who Howard Cosell couldn't get on the phone in 2 seconds. He was the biggest thing. He was a bigger star than any of the people he'd interview. So it was, and he was incredibly funny. People don't know that about him. He was incredibly funny and great to be around. And, humor was like a really big thing, a big priority for him. Like once I walked into his office and he was meeting with Harry Edwards. I don't know if you know who that is, but he was the man who organized the Black Power salute at the Mexico City Olympics in 1968. He's a brilliant philosopher, and he's 6'8", and a 6'8" bald black guy with a mustache, and he wears sunglasses with a beard, and he has, there's something kind of intimidating looking about him, and he's so brilliant. And I just dropped something off in Howard's office one day, and this is what the typical thing he would do. He'd say to me, he looks at me and says, "Peter, while you're here, what do you think about black coaches in the NFL?" And I know he's expecting me to say something funny. So I said, "I don't know. There seem to be enough black players on the field. Do they have to coach too?" And Howard goes, "That's an excellent point, Peter." And Harry Edwards is looking at me like I'm crazy. And then Howard starts laughing, and I start breaking up, and Harry Edwards just busts out laughing hysterically. And, those were the kind of like greatest moments with Howard Cosell. It was amazing.
I saw Howard Cosell in a couple of the Dean Martin roasts, and he was phenomenal. He had great, at least from my estimation, he had great like comedic timing and a great sensibility about it. Even if you go to his interviews, all of his interviews, he just had a nice rap with people.
He was just unbelievably funny, and I never met anybody who kind of enjoyed and reveled in his fame like he did. He knew he could get away with anything, and he just did. He could say anything at any time. I remember him interviewing some manager. I forgot, one of those really old-time baseball managers, in the majors, and, one of those old kind of gruff tobacco-chewing guys, and at the end of the interview, Howard says, "Okay, one more question. Why is it that you hate the Jewish people?" And the guy goes, "No, I don't." And Howard goes, "Think I'm just screwing around with you." I mean, he would just do these things, and it would be so much fun to be around him, and it was just great.
Oh man, that's an incredible. I love Howard Cosell. I could talk about him all day. I mean, just such a talent. So you worked with Howard Cosell in 82 to 84. You said, but I was doing a little bit of research on you, and I found out you did something that was hilarious. You wrote a letter. So you found out that the Washington Post was hiring, and tell me if I get this right. And you write a letter to him as a woman, because you found out that they weren't hiring men at the time, or white men or something like that. And so you wrote them a letter as a woman to try to get the job.
Yeah, that was right after I graduated college. A guy I was at the University of Maryland, which is, 9 miles outside of Washington, D.C., and a guy who had been the editor-in-chief of the student newspaper was working as a copy aide at the Washington Post. And we were talking, and I said, God, that's such a great job. I'd love to get in there. And he said the problem is that they're not really hiring white males, because they definitely had a shortage of women at that time. And, Washington, D.C. was about 83% black, I think, at that time. And so, it was completely understandable. But, I figured I'd try to get a work around it. And I wrote a letter under the name of my friend, Faith Michelle Cates. And it was a really funny job letter. And by mail, obviously the times were different. They offered me a job with really awful hours. So I didn't know what to do because, they would be expecting a woman. So I wrote another letter explaining why I wrote the first letter. And then they were so kind of like blown away by the audacity of it all that I got to go in and I met with like all the biggest editors of the Washington Post. And, ultimately I got to write a lot. I got to kind of get in on the sports section.
Oh man, that's such a great story. So like when you wrote the letter, you just had did you think that you were just kind of sending it off and you really didn't expect to hear back?
No, I expected to hear back because that's how stupid I was. I fully expected to hear back, which is, ridiculous, but, ultimately I did hear back.
I mean, given your writing history and some of the shows you wrote for, it seemed like that idea might make it into a script for Seinfeld or something like that. I mean, it sounds like a great idea for a TV show.
It's funny. I never really thought of it that way, but you're right. That would make a great that would have made a great episode of something.
Yeah, maybe a George.
In fact, I'm now kicking myself that I didn't think of that because, for a good part of the Seinfeld, George was unemployed. It would have been a great thing if he had written a letter as a woman.
To get a
God,
job.
Why didn't I think of that? Can you believe this? This is 20 years later, and I'm talking to you for the first time, and you're giving me a Seinfeld idea I should have done.
Well, hey, I'm just trying to help. I'm doing my part. So you wrote for Seinfeld, obviously one of the biggest shows of all time, if not the biggest show of all time. How did you get your start? I mean, I think you met Larry David out somewhere, correct?
Yeah, I moved from New York to Los Angeles. I had been at the time after working for Cosell, I just started writing magazine articles, and I became a freelance magazine writer, and I was really kind of enjoying that life, although, the effort to, pay your rent was kind of Herculean. But I was writing for, GQ and the New York Times and a lot of women's magazines and stuff like that. And I just felt like I kind of needed a change, so I moved to Los Angeles. And I bumped into Larry David, who I had met in New York like once or twice. And he knew that I was a writer. I don't think he knew that I had never written a script. And he said, I'm going to be doing this little show with Jerry Seinfeld. Maybe you should give me a writing sample and I'll pass it on to Jerry and maybe you could, write a script. So I gave him an article, a humor kind of essay, very New York oriented, that I'd written in the New York Times. And, I later found out that Larry had made the same offer to several people who, I had also known. And, they all turned in scripts. And somehow the only thing that Jerry responded to was this article. So I got to come in there and, they gave me, at that point they had shot 4 episodes. So they gave me the tapes of those 4 episodes and I watched them. And I got really nervous because I was thinking, oh my God, this is so good. This is actually something I'd want to do. So, I got to write a script and I didn't really know what I was doing, which I think in a way was an advantage at that time. But, I put in one clutch performance in my life and next thing you know, I was loaded.
So you never wrote any kind of script before? It was just articles for different magazines?
Yeah.
So when you get the job to work on Seinfeld, and you sit down, I guess, at your typewriter or your computer on the first day, what was going through your mind? Did you have any idea of how to structure a show or anything like that? I mean, I'm guessing you hadn't written any dialogue or jokes, between characters. How did you kind of figure that all out?
The jokes and dialogue came kind of easily to me. What was really difficult and is still somewhat difficult and will always be difficult is story structure and things like that. That's really hard to learn. And that's what I had absolutely no training in. But, as far as writing dialogue and things like that, I had that kind of right from the beginning. In my first episode, I had a run in there where Jerry and George are arguing about who is the bigger idiot between the two of them. And they're both arguing for themselves. I'm a much bigger idiot than you. And, that was perfect Seinfeld dialogue. And I think what really helped me in that regard is that, having written for the New York Times one day and GQ another day and a woman's magazine the next day and the Village Voice the next day, I got to kind of alter my own voice a little bit because, you couldn't write the same style for all those different publications. So I think I had a good ear for that kind of thing. But, writing stories was very, very, very difficult. I was also good at, coming up with ideas for the show, but figuring out where they go and how you get the characters in trouble and how you get them maybe out of trouble. And, that stuff was really, really hard. And I wrestled with it kind of throughout the course of the show.
And that was always going to be my question. I would always wonder, for a show with the stories are so rich and the ideas are so great, where would you find the inspiration for some of these? I mean, you wrote some of my favorite Seinfeld episodes of all time. I think The Apartment, I love that episode. I think it's so funny. Where would you come up with these ideas? Would you just sit in the writer's room and kind of rack your brain, or did you kind of have to go out and experience?
I wish there was a way, especially back then, I wish there was a way that I could lean on to actually come up with ideas. I would say the best answer to your question is that I tried to get lucky. Larry David was incredible at listening and overhearing people's conversations or even causing troubling situations just to see what would happen. So I tried that. That didn't really work so great for me. But I don't know. I just, the thing is, I had to change my way of thinking, which was when you're in journalism, you're looking out at the world and reporting on it. When you're on Seinfeld, you kind of have to get into your own thoughts. It was like your own tiniest little thoughts were always the best sources of story ideas on the show. Yeah, and we did not have a writing room, by the way.
There was no writing room?
No, we were. I think one of the reasons the show was so good is that Larry and Jerry didn't really know what they were doing, and they never had that kind of structure. Or you basically came in and you told Larry and Jerry what ideas you had for all the different characters, and they would say, yes, I like that, no, I don't like that, and then they would say, okay, use those ideas, and then they'd like send you on your way, and you were, in your office, and it was up to you to write a script.
Oh, wow. Well, you say, they didn't know what they were doing. I remember hearing Jim Carrey say one time that ignorance leads to innovation. And I guess that's kind of what you're saying. Like, you didn't know what you're doing, so you had to figure out how to do it in your own way. So that's interesting.
Absolutely. And, a lot of the hallmarks of the show kind of happened by accident. All of a sudden Larry started connecting the storylines, and that became like a thing where you kind of had to connect up all the storylines. And, each of the characters got so big that you really needed, stories for all of them every week, or, hopefully the best thing would be like maybe 3 stories where 2 of the characters are involved in those stories. So, it was a very tricky thing, and, you had to kind of keep up with Larry's creativity, and his creativity really evolved. And so, it's very tough to keep up with.
There's a lot made of, like, I remember seeing something that, like, Larry's material fit well in Jerry's delivery. How much of the show, or if not all of it, but how much of it was dependent upon their relationship and their overseeing of it? I mean, they work so well together as a team. What do you think it was about them together that made the working environment so good and made the show so good?
I think the smartest thing Jerry ever did was, after being offered a TV, to do a TV show, that he picked Larry David to write with him, because, you couldn't find 2 people who were more different in a way. And I think that's what really worked. It was kind of like a Lennon and McCartney thing where, Larry was kind of darker and kind of like looked at, Jerry looked at the big picture of things, and Larry kind of like looked at the minutia of things. They just worked perfectly together. My office for much of the show, for probably the last 4 years that I was on the show, was, right next door to Larry and Jerry's office. And, I'd hear them rewriting a script or writing a script and hear them laughing constantly. And I'd be like so jealous, like, God, they're having this, this stuff that's such a slog and so hard for me. And they're just like laughing it up all the time.
So it's just the perfect marriage between 2 individuals to create that show. You mentioned that Larry, when he kind of went on, liked to connect the stories. For me, I know in season 4, which is one of my favorite, if not my favorite season of Seinfeld, where they're pitching the Jerry Show and the creation of the Jerry Show. The show,
yeah, that's by far the best season of the show.
Yeah, I think from top to bottom, it's the best season they have. And you had some great episodes in that season. The Virgin, the Visa, implant, smelly car. Which I have to ask you about the implant. But my question is, was it hard to have to weave that overarching thread of the Jerry Show and the overarching story of season 4? Was it hard to weave that into your individual stories?
Yes, it was very hard. And I wrote one script that they actually really liked that was continuing the story, and they decided they had enough with that thread. And so it really kind of was a bummer. But
what was that about?
That was difficult.
What was that story about that you wrote? That they had the script, I mean.
I forgot exactly, but it happened. I was writing it. It was something about a humidor and the cigars. And, once Kramer's cigar burned down Susan's family cabin,
mm-hmm.
That happened like just as I was finishing my script. So, all of a sudden it seemed like the cigar story had run its course. But, it happens. And, some of them, I didn't really have to deal with that problem too much. The smelly car didn't deal with that, and the implant didn't really deal with this, the season storyline.
The implant to me is probably my favorite episode of Seinfeld of all time. And when I remember when I was a kid, and I'm big into James Bond, and I saw Tomorrow Never Dies, and I said, wow, I mean, Terry Hatcher, that's a whoa. You have to log that one in your memory bank. And if so, for you, was she? I think I heard somewhere. I couldn't find it, but was she your inspiration for writing the show?
No.
No. What was the inspiration for writing the show? The implant.
I was at my health club talking to somebody, and a woman walked by with an incredible body, and my head kind of turned, and the person I was talking to said, "Oh, come on, they're fake." And I was just thinking, that would make a great little moment where they would be in a health club, that would happen. They'd say, they're fake. And then that would be it. It would just be like one of those side trips that Seinfeld always took. Then I started thinking, this could be a bigger story. This could be like, doing the detective work could be really interesting. And, that's how it came out. And, the funny thing is, when we were casting it, I think we had one woman come in to read, and she was okay. And then the casting person said, "How about Terry Hatcher?" And way too quickly, I said, "Yes." I had just seen her at a restaurant like a week before. And, again, this was a dinner with a friend where I barely heard a word because I'm just staring at Terry Hatcher. And she was such a doll on the set. She was a blast. She's really athletic and everything. So she would after a rehearsal, she'd like, "Hey, let's shoot some baskets." She was great.
Oh, wow. That's a great woman right there. Wants to shoot
she
around.
Was tons of fun, and just, a really, really great girl.
And she was really
I bumped
funny.
into her once in a while. I haven't in a while, but, she's just a doll.
And she was very fun. She was really funny in the show. One thing, the thing about Seinfeld is you can watch these episodes 100 times, and a different line will stick out to you every time that makes you laugh. I saw this episode on TV not too long ago, and Elaine says to Jerry, "I thought you were more of a leg guy." And he's like, "A leg? I have legs." And for some reason, I laughed about that line for all week. I have legs. I just thought it was so funny. And then, of course, the line everyone remembers is "They're real and they're spectacular." When you wrote that, did you know? Okay, boom. Actually,
I have to say, Larry wrote that line.
Oh, he did. He did.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's such a great line. It's such a great,
It's great, and it's big. But, I always like the little lines, like that one you just mentioned, I always like. And another one I really like in that episode is when Jerry says, where George is with the priest at his girlfriend's house in Detroit, and the priest says to him, like, "You've been a great comfort to, the girl," and George says, "Well, losing a loved one, forget about it." That's what I love. Forget it. Just in a dark moment like that, throwing out this tiny little meaningless, colloquialism. That's the kind of stuff I really love.
I saw an episode, I think it was The Fix Up the other night, and Jerry is explaining to Elaine, why George is a good catch. And I just remember he said, you couldn't tell by looking at him, but he can bait a hook. And I just thought that was another one that just killed me because it was just so like he was reaching for something positive about George, and he can bait a hook. But when you talk about the implant, they're real, they're spectaculars in the lexicon, of course, but also double dip a chip is one of those things that's like I didn't even know that was a Seinfeld thing until much later in life where I started watching the show more. And I heard double dip from literally I'm born in the early 90s, and I remember hearing double dip my entire life. That was just a phrase. And I know you're credited with coining that phrase, double dip. How did that come about?
I was at a party and somebody actually got like a little bit, annoyed at somebody saying, you shouldn't do that. You're putting your germs in if you do it twice. So I thought, oh, that's a really funny thing. And, then it wasn't any stroke of genius to come up with the phrase double dip,
I think it's great. It's great.
Yeah, that was that episode just came together, and I had a bunch of storylines. I just had a bunch of actual scenes that seemed like they would be really funny, and somehow I meshed them all together. And at that point I thought, and it worked out so well, I thought, I got it. Now I know how to really, I'll never have any problems writing another Seinfeld episode. That system never worked again.
It was a one-off, one time only.
It worked one time only. I just had the thing about, some George arguing with for the death in the family fair at the airline counter. I had that lying around. I always liked the idea of somebody getting into a fight, at a wake. It was just like a whole bunch of things, and somehow I smushed them all together,
Was the implant, when Double Dip came out and They're Real, They're Spectacular, I know that was season 4, so you had a few episodes under your belt, but was that the first time that you kind of saw the impact of the show and its like instant influence on pop culture?
Yeah, that was kind of the first time. Yeah, that was like the first time where, Double Dip, it kind of got out into the lexicon. I was like, wow, this is great. On the other hand, it kind of gives you unreal expectations for the rest of your life. You start thinking like everything you write, or you're hoping to have an impact on the culture of society. And, I got lucky with a bunch of those, like Yada Yada and Shrinkage, but, it's very hard to penetrate this culture, especially the way it is now, where everything's so diffused. Like the hottest show in the world gets, maybe 3 million viewers.
Yeah. So it's so spread out. You have so many options and so many different places. The internet, television has 1,000 channels. But
I was like a huge fan of Mad Men, and it was always like staggering to me. It was like a brilliantly written show. And every year it would have this commercial tie-in with Banana Republic, and every one of the actors would be on the cover of magazines. And, if they got 2.5 million viewers of any one episode, it was like a huge week for them.
It's so much more fragmented than it was. Because Seinfeld would get what? How many millions per episode?
When it got big, 35 million.
Oh, crazy. Just crazy.
And, in the first couple of seasons, it was, until it moved to Thursday night, it was, not doing great in the ratings. We were getting beaten by Jake and the Fat Man.
Jake and the Fat Man.
And then it was getting a lot of critical notice. And then when it moved to Thursday night, it shot through the roof. And
yeah.
Of course, Larry David asked a comment about that, said, if they weren't watching us on Wednesday, we don't want them on Thursday. Which, of course, the network people were apoplectic over that comment.
I'm sure, but it's a classic Larry David style comment. Just sounds exactly like him. You talk about all the great phrases that you got out there in the lexicon. Yada yada, which is used by everybody. Shrinkage, one of the greatest Seinfeld moments of all time is when she laughs saying, "I'm really sorry," and he just says, "I was in the pool." Just so fantastic. One though that I actually say a whole lot that I love. It's another one that's one of those little things that's, I don't know, it just makes me laugh. Like I have legs makes me laugh. Anti-dentite to me was so funny. I just thought that was such a funny phrase. Next thing you know, you're going to say they have their own schools. They do have their own schools. I mean, it was just such a great story. And I thought that would be so much. I mean, everyone would say anti-dentite, right? I mean, I know that was probably your idea,
I thought
too.
that would catch on, too.
Yeah.
When I wrote it, that was like the only time I said, oh, God, this is going to be a thing. And, of course, it wasn't.
But then the end of the episode is so great. Dentist, who needs them? And then, not to mention the blacks and the Jews. I mean, these things were just, anti-dentite, did you have like a brush with a dentist or something? Or was that just something that, a story that popped in your mind?
The whole idea of, I have my closest friend in the world grew up Catholic, and then he converted. And one day, we were just lunching or talking or something, and, he had made some kind of like little Jewish joke, and I had this thought, like, I wonder how long it took him before he felt comfortable saying a joke like that. And then I was thinking how funny it would be if it was like the next day, like after he converted, he was like immediately making Jewish jokes. And that's what started the episode. And so, I just really loved Bryan Cranston. So I had him be the guy who converted. And then, it was by accident, and that kind of just, led to, a whole dentistry thing and anti-dentite.
I love that episode so much. I noticed though when I look at the episodes that you wrote for Seinfeld, some of them, honestly, I'm not even joking, are my favorites. The Implant, one of my favorites. The Betrayal, I think, is such an underrated episode by how funny that is, and the idea to do it in reverse, which is just, I think, phenomenal. But I do notice that a lot of your stories center around like Jerry and Elaine, and a lot of them are Elaine. When you talk about the sponge, are you sponge worthy? It's an Elaine episode. She has a lot of big lines and big stories in most of your episodes. And I know you said you wrote for women's magazines. Was it easier for you to write for Elaine or write for women?
It was easier for me to write for Jerry and Elaine because I think they were, comparatively normal characters. They weren't, as extreme as George and Kramer. And that, most people had a much easier time writing for George and Kramer. I liked writing a lot for Jerry, and I liked stories for Jerry. In fact, I had so many Jerry stories that I used to end up giving them to Kramer. Like when he had a low sperm count and he had to switch to boxers. My original thought was that would be a good Jerry story, but then, I kind of like flipped it over to Kramer. I never thought that you could have a truly great episode unless Elaine had a strong part in it. So, I was very aware of that. And I was really proud of the sponge because everybody was like saying, oh my God, I guess that was written by Carol Leifer, right? Like even to this day, people say, did Carol Leifer write the sponge episode? I'm like, no, I wrote it, a guy.
How did you come up with that one though? Being from the male perspective, it's the episode where Elaine has the Today's Sponge is being discontinued and she stocks up on him, and then she's real. And that's another episode, Peter. I got to tell you, the line where you're going to do something about the sideburns is another one that kills me all the time when I hear it. But so how'd you come up with that one? Did you just like read an article that they were doing away with Today's Sponge?
No, I heard it on NPR in my car. That one came about and never happened again, where I heard in my car that the sponge was going out of business. And immediately I thought to myself, if Elaine is a sponge user, she'd probably stock up before they run out of them on the shelves. And let's say she gets like a limited number of them, that would change her entire screening process for who she sleeps with. And boom, like I had almost a whole show.
Just off
so
that
one
was like
little a gift from the heavens. That happened to Larry David like every day.
Yeah, you just hear
to
something.
Me once.
Yeah, well, hey, when Larry left, was it season 7? After season 7, he left, or before? I think it was after.
Yeah, he left after season 7, and I left after season 8. And the show left after season 9.
Yeah. I read somewhere that you were credited with kind of steering the series kind of in the right direction without Larry David being there. You know, you were the executive producer or co-executive producer of the show, and you were credited with kind of keeping that Larry David quality and helping steer the show. Would you agree with that?
No. I mean, I did all I could. You know, actually, I did. I shouldn't even say that. You know, I mean, I certainly didn't consciously do it. And looking back, if I had to do it again, I think I probably would have been much more assertive in doing that. But, you know, whatever I did, I just basically was, you know, stuck in my role. Not stuck, but, you know, I was very locked into my role as a person who just writes scripts. You know, I didn't want to run the show. I didn't want, you know, I happened to have given out a lot of stories that year, you know, to other scripts that I think were kind of Larry David-y ideas, or, you know, just the small kind of slice of life stuff, you know, like the whole thing about the English patient, you know, and there were several others. I was like giving away, you know, a lot of my ideas because, you know, without Larry, it was, you know, much more of a struggle.
Was it? That's what I was going to ask. Was it like for the first time having to ride the bike without the training wheels? I mean, was he there to kind of help always guide toward the right direction?
Yeah, it was. You know, it was a big thing when he was gone. You know, it was. You know, he was the complete creative force behind the show. So it was. You know, it was really a tough adjustment.
A couple more things, Peter, before I get you out of here. I mean, this is such a great conversation for me. I have to ask you about Julia Louis-Dreyfus. I had a conversation with somebody last week. I was just watching I was catching up on the newest season of Veep, which I think is just a highly funny show, great writing. And I came to the proclamation that I think she might be the funniest, you know, actress comedian of all time. You know, not stand-up, but just funniest woman on television I really ever seen. What's your opinion of Julia Louis-Dreyfus and her incredible talent?
I kind of would have to agree with you. I mean, she's just mind-blowing. You know, like every line you wrote for her, you'd hear her say it the first time and it would never come out like you thought it would sound. And then you go, oh my God, her way is like 1,000 times better. You know, she's unbelievable. I mean, she's a force of nature and, you know, and a great person too. So, you know, I mean, she's just, you know, like once in a while, like if I would give a suggestion to her about, you know, the motivation behind the line and she would go, oh yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's good. You'd feel like the greatest person on earth, you know, just because like Julia loved your idea. And she did, you know, and she was, like you said, you know, I wrote a lot of stuff for her and she was like always super appreciative.
Yeah, I just think that she's so funny. And when you watch her on Seinfeld, she's a completely different character. Well, obviously she's a different character, but the way she's delivering lines, even in Veep, and the way she does everything, it's a completely different person and character and in cadence from Elaine, but both are just such funny characters. And I think she's the only person who could pull that off. And
you know, I mean, the funniest thing about Veep and vis-a-vis Julia is that, you know, I don't think you could be an American and speak English any more beautifully than Julia does. You know, she enunciates words so perfectly. I love listening. I always love just the way she speaks. And now to hear her on this show saying incredibly vile things in her perfect diction, it makes it like 30 times funnier for me.
Oh, it's so good. I mean, she definitely is. I mean, her cadence and the way she speaks and her pronunciation, like you said, it's almost melodic and it's very staccato. It's rapid fire, but it's just, oh my God, she's so good on that show. And of course on Seinfeld. I love Julia Louis-Dreyfus. You said you left after season 8 of Seinfeld. You were going to take a deal with Steven Spielberg's DreamWorks. Was that a difficult decision to leave a show that was so massive and that you could write something and it'd be instantly pop culture and you'd get all this adulation for it? Was it a hard decision to do?
It wasn't that hard at the time, just because I was a little exhausted at that point. And, I knew that if I started my DreamWorks deal now, which I had put off for several seasons, I had that deal, signed, but I kept putting it off to stay at another season at Seinfeld and then another season. So anyway, at the end of that season, I was kind of exhausted, and I was thinking this, and so that was one thing. Then I kind of had the feeling that the next season would be the last one, and I didn't want to be like one of 18 Seinfeld writers who were out there pitching shows the next season. So I thought I'd leave a little earlier. And also the last episode I'd written that season was Yada Yada. And, it was a very small episode, with tiny slice of life stuff, kind of a throwback episode.
Yeah, I was going to say comparative to season 8, season 9, which were really massive in scale and a little bit goofier. Yeah.
I mean, this was really just a small story. And so I felt very good about leaving on that note. And to tell you the truth, I knew that my office was going to be on that lot. The same lot. And if I came up with a great idea for the next season, I could probably still write a script without having to be there day to day and, and be slogging away. So, the betrayal was after I was gone. I wrote that with Dave Mandel. And that was, that was season 9. I wasn't even there.
And that was a great episode too. It was one of the best of season 9. I love that. I love the idea of that show. So it wasn't a difficult decision for you to make, but you were still around, so you could contribute when you needed to. When we confirmed this interview a couple days ago, I actually purchased your novel on Amazon. It Won't Always Be This Great. By Peter.
Oh, you're the one.
That's me. I'm the guy. I can't wait to read it. I know I read the synopsis. Sounds like a great idea. Any more novels down the pipeline? Anything you want to really start writing again, or was that kind of you wanted to try it for that time?
No, I've actually written another one, and now I have to now I'm just kind of sticking my foot in the process of getting it published. I think it could be a tough one to actually get published because for too many reasons to go into here, but I enjoyed writing it, and that's the most important thing. And so I did that, and, I've actually started doing stand-up about a year and a half ago.
Oh, how's that going?
It's a blast. It's so much fun.
That's got to be that's got to be the most difficult thing I think in the world to do. I mean, the great musicians of all time, it's still not one guy out there. It's a band or one woman, I should say. It's a band out there. You have a production, you have lights, you have this, you have that. If you go to a concert nowadays, there's massive video screens that are distracting you from this and that. And there's multiple costume changes. It's just a big production. But with stand-up, it's literally you, a microphone, and a spotlight. I just think that and to be able to get people to emote from that, I mean, I just don't see how there's anything more difficult.
Yeah, I know. A lot of people say that. And on the other hand, it seems like everybody and their uncle is doing stand-up now. So that's kind of a weird. It's kind of a weird paradox that everyone thinks it's so hard and everyone's doing it. And the only thing that confirms the fact that it might be really hard is that so many of these people aren't funny.
Well, if you're not funny, it might be pretty difficult.
They all seem like they went to the same stand-up comedy class. Talk about yourself, talk about who you're dating, have super energy up there. I don't talk. I don't do any observational stuff, and or it's just slipped in the context of something else. And, I have no energy. I don't, take the microphone out of the stand. I just stand there. I don't even really acknowledge the audience.
Well, you know what?
To me, it's a good way to kind of just in the way.
Yeah. It's just a unnecessary obstacle there.
I'm like, can you stop laughing? Like I'm trying to get out of here.
I'm just trying to do my quick set and get out. Well, Peter, I thank you so much for taking the time. I'm looking forward to the return of your sports show if that does happen. I'm going to be there to support it all the time. And you can go to your website at pmehlman.com. You're on Twitter as well. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much. This has really been fun.
Thanks, Peter.